Hey, everybody, welcome to a brand new episode of the Hemmings Hot Rod BBQ podcast. On this episode, we have Myron Vernis and Mark Brinker, the creators of A Quiet Greatness. A Quiet Greatness is, I think it's a 4.5 volume set of perhaps what is the greatest collection of JDM vehicles assembled, period, photographed, and laid out in a set. Would I be off base saying that, or is that pretty dead on?
Yeah. We say 4 volumes and a supplement, but yeah, I think it's great.
Okay, so how did this all come together? Doing this kind of photographic docu-series of some of the greatest, JDM cars ever made, and also where did you come up with the title?
Yeah, so the way this came about was I told Myron we should do this for about 2 years, and he very cleverly said no every single time. And then I just caught him at a weak moment and got him working enough that it was too late to turn back. Kind of like if you're hiking through the snow and you get lost, you can't turn around and go the other way. So we were lost on a hike for 6 years, basically working on the book.
6 years. Wow.
Yeah. Really, Mike, what happened was I retired from my day job and I ran out of excuses I could possibly make. So
right, of course. Okay, well, so A Quiet Greatness, it focuses on JDM cars, but is that just what you like, or are you car enthusiasts as a whole? Like, walk me through the process of kind of your history and, in the car industry, working with cars, being an enthusiast, stuff like that, up until how the book started or how the series started.
Well, Mark and I have been friends for, what do you say, Mark, about 20 years?
20 years.
Yeah. And we actually met over probably obscure French cars.
Oh, okay.
I think we may have had contact before that, but quite a few years ago, Mark, in addition to being, world-renowned orthopedic surgeon, he's an accomplished racer, author, all this other stuff. A real Renaissance man, unlike this guy from Akron, Ohio. And he determined that he was going to go conquer Bonneville. And as Mark does, as Mark does, he studied what classes were the ones to attack, and he determined it was going to be a small bore class, and he determined that the best vehicle to do that in would be an obscure French car called a Deutsche Bonnet.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, kind of a French Lotus with a small bore, 2-cylinder, horizontally opposed engine.
Perfect choice.
And somehow he found out that I had a couple of them, and neither one was for sale. But then once he told me his story and what he was going to do with it, then we had to move one to Houston for him to work on, and that kind of was the beginning of our relationship.
Wow. Okay. All right. I want to wrap my head around the fact that you decided to use the most obscure car on the planet to go to Bonneville with. Why? Why that specific car? Why that specific class?
Yeah. So the specific class was I wanted, whenever I put my mind to doing something, I want to be successful. Going there and competing and having fun is great, but if you're going to go through all that effort, why not have all the fun and everything you can get out of it and go home with a record? So the goal was always to break a record. So I'm an orthopedic surgeon. I'm a fracture specialist. I put broken people back together. At Bonneville, they don't have car crashes. They have plane crashes, really, because the cars are going so fast. And at the time, I had a young daughter, and so I decided that I didn't want to come home in a box. So I picked a class where you didn't have to go 300 miles an hour to break a record. And I'm a sports car guy, a lot of my collection, and we'll eventually get around to your question about, is the only thing we like Japanese cars? And the answer is no. So I looked at sports cars from the 1950s, and I looked at the different classes, and there was a class for 750cc displacement sports cars. Well, if you start looking at that, and by the way, it's not a vintage class. It's an open class, meaning a brand new car could go.
Sure.
there are no brand new 750cc sports cars. And so if you look at the universe of what's available, aerodynamics is really important. And the Deutsche Bank has a very low coefficient of drag and a small frontal area. So it was a really good choice. And as it turned out, we broke the naturally aspirated and the forced induction record and kept breaking my record. So I set 8 records at Bonneville with that car.
Huh. Okay. What was your highest trap speed on that thing?
A little over 100 miles an hour, which doesn't sound like a lot, but you have to understand that 750 cc's, that's the displacement of a wine bottle.
Oh, you're talking to a motorcycle racer. I get it.
Right. The other thing is Bonneville is a terrific place to race from one standpoint because it's flat for as far as the eye can see. There's nothing to hit. I mean, you don't even see a bug out there, let alone birds or anything like that. But when you take into account the altitude and the heat, it's like racing, depending on the day, it can be like 8,000 or 9,000 foot elevation. So it's not an ideal place to race, from air intake, fuel mixture kind of situation. And also, even at low speeds, even at 100 miles an hour, you're losing traction on the salt. The car the car is actually dancing around a little bit. So, at Le Mans, these cars were faster, but that's on tarmac
it's on tarmac, sure.
And it's not over 100 degrees.
Right. Okay. So Myron, how about you? How did, you had a couple of these cars, but talk a little bit about the cars that kind of got you into this as well.
I started in the hobby. Really my first car, which I still have, is I bought a Porsche 356B when I was 19 years old. Well, it's back when they were cheap, right? I really wanted a 911, but I was a poor kid from the wrong part of town, and 356s were cheap and available. So I started off with my 356, which I still have after almost 48 years now.
That's fabulous.
And then I really got hooked on 356s. The car culture was very cool. It was very much, there wasn't a lot of support from Porsche because they were all behind the modern cars. Nobody wanted them. So, I really got into it, made some great friends. And over the years, I've owned over 100 356s. And,
wow. Okay.
And lots of them, I paid less than $1,000 for, right? That's just kind of where the market was.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what got me hooked in the hobby. And then as the cars got more expensive and the culture started changing and people started valuing them more for the collector value as opposed to just the grassroots culture that I was involved with, I started looking for other cars that were similar. And that's kind of how I came upon the French cars, Deutsche Banks. And eventually that same spirit, many, many years later, kind of got me into Japanese cars after hearing like a lot of the old guys who I knew as young guys who were into 356s keep saying that, young kids don't care about cars. What I found was, they don't care about 57 Chevys, but they care about cars. I mean, they did the same thing I was doing with my 356s, right? They're finding cheap Japanese cars, cheap BMWs, and putting all their money into that stuff. And we found just as much passion in that group. And that was kind of like the impetus behind our book here. Our book project was to help legitimize that and kind of prove to the world, there's some really, really great stuff out there, and you just can't, put a broad brush on, Japanese cars weren't cool. A lot of the Japanese cars that were sent to us in the United States weren't cool, but that was a very important part of Japanese marketing strategy to take over our country. In the 60s, 70s, and 80s, they were sending reliable, cheap cars when we weren't making reliable and cheap cars. So,
sure. So when you first started doing the research for the book, you said you started and it wasn't going to be nearly as big as it turned out. When did you guys start to think like, oh shit, this is one hell of a rabbit hole we're going down right now? And as you were progressing through it, did you say, okay, we're going to put a cap on this, or we're just going to go out and document every amazing, JDM car that's ever existed.
Yeah. So have you physically seen the book or held it in your hands?
I have not.
Okay. Well, if you do, you'll realize that there was no cap ever. It's 35 pounds. It's 1,400 pages. It was without a rudder and without a cap. So when did it start growing beyond reasonableness? I think pretty early, maybe 6 months into it. And
Okay.
I think to Myron and my credit, we both had the vision that we wanted this to be really spectacular, over the top. We wanted the best paper, the best binding, the best cover. Sure. If you do a serious book with good writing, but the production value is poor, then the cars inside are not worthy. If you do a first class Ferrari level kind of book, then it raises up the perceptions of the subject matter. So Myron and I were totally in step, from the beginning. And because of that mission that we really, this wasn't a money making venture ever, right? This was right. So
Mark's being very kind when he's saying it wasn't a money making
venture. I get it. I understand.
And so we were both of the same mind that we wanted it to be the ultimate. So when Myron or I discovered, another car or another 10 cars, we would have a conversation and we would, pitch the cars to each other. And not all of them made the list, but it was never because of time or space or some artificial cap.
Okay. When it came to determining, and I guess more importantly, the photography, how did that come about? Are these all original photographs that you guys have taken, or the photographers? Like, getting access to these cars has to be difficult. So how did that come about?
There are 2,200 images approximately in the set. And Mark and I estimate that of the 6 years, about 2 years of that time is pretty much dedicated to sourcing photographs. And they came from all kinds of sources. We had fabulous cooperation with all the major Japanese manufacturers. We had full access to their archives, to their heritage collections. We commissioned photography. We had enthusiasts actually go out and grab photographs for us of rare cars. A great story. Probably the greatest story is I found a photographer on Instagram who was doing great driving shots of JDM stuff in Hong Kong, and made contact with him. And they went out. They made it their mission to shoot cars that we needed. And I mean, really, really great photography. And they did this during the peak of the Hong Kong riots. I mean, so they're like risking their own safety by going out there at times when they weren't supposed to be out there. Yeah. We sourced photographs from all over the world. We commissioned photographs. We purchased photographs from photographers that they already had existing photography, a lot of the publications. So as far as we even found a few years ago, Retromobile in Paris, which is the last place you find JDM stuff. I bought the archives of a retired automotive photographer who went to every Tokyo Motor Show from the mid 60s through the early 80s. And I bought 800 images that they had out of his collection. We used like 40 of those in the book. So a lot of most of us had previously unpublished photographs.
Okay. Well, let me ask you, what is, when people hear JDM, I mean, it's only been in the last, I want to say 10, 12 years that JDM has really kind of been popular, right? To the extent I think that it is now. How difficult was it to decide what cars to put in there and say, is this going to make an impact in the automotive world? Are people going to appreciate it? And to your point, when a lot of these cars were introduced, we had no idea. Americans had no idea what these cars were, what they were about, who made them. And it's only until recently where people are really discovering, well, the larger amount of automotive enthusiasts are really discovering JDM stuff, right? JDM enthusiasts have always been there, but it's never, like, to the title of the book, A Quiet Greatness. they've always been in the background. And I think they're finally starting to get the justification that they deserve.
Yeah. So the answer to your question is that in a way it was really simple. Things that are complicated are when you have to go, in front of a board of directors and, present to people to make decisions. We had a board of directors of two, right? Myron and
Right.
I, if a car came up, we would have a discussion. We didn't always agree. By the end of the conversation, we agreed, but it was always fun. It was never,
Yeah.
and the default was that if one of us was super passionate about the car, even if the other one didn't get it, then it went in the book. And the decisions were, that was not a hard part of this process. The hard part was keeping track of all the text, all the different models and submodels and variations and all the different markets. What made the book difficult was not selecting the cars. What made the book difficult was staying out of a state of confusion. Nissan Cherry sounds like it means something, but it really means nothing. There's cherries from all different markets. One could be a semi truck and another could be a micro car. Different generations, same year, different markets, could be totally different cars. So it's kind of a word salad of cars. And that's what was difficult. Myron and I sometimes found ourselves talking about a car, and then 5 minutes into the conversation, we realized we were talking about different generations of the same car. So that was the challenge.
Okay.
But it wasn't hard to, either pass the gate or not pass the gate of whether it was going to be in the book. And, people ask us this question a lot, what was the criteria? The criteria was, was it important? Was it cool? Was it something that, lit Myron and I on fire? And I think largely we somehow through the process got it right, because we thought we were going to get lots of complaints. We've sold a lot of books, and we haven't gotten complaints like, hey, how come there's no fill in the blank? That hasn't been an issue.
Well, it's 1,400 pages, 2,200 photos. If you guys missed something, I think you guys probably did an okay job of compiling the right cars and getting the right information.
Well, Mike, it's a totally subjective list of cars chosen by two lifelong gearheads. I mean, dyed-in-the-wool kind of gearheads. And it wasn't based on a criteria. I mean, the baseline had to be Japanese, but the cool factor and the special factor, it was universal, right? It had to appeal to everybody who was into cars.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a big thing. I mean,
And one other just point of clarification. There's plenty of non-JDM Japanese cars in the book. It's not just about JDM cars. There's a focus on JDM cars, but we have US market cars, we have European market cars.
Yeah. Well, I think, to that, I mean, when I was a kid, my dad always used to tell me, he's always like, listen, if you like something and you think something is cool, odds are there are a lot of other people out there that feel the same exact way about it. And it's very true. I mean, listen, I know I like cars that other people look at and be like, that's terrible, or that's disgusting, or that's ugly, or whatever the case is. And my whole thought is, okay, I still dig it. So if I like it, I appreciate your opinion, but I don't care about it. Right. Because it doesn't affect me either way. I'm still going to like what I like. And I think putting a collection of vehicles like this together is tremendous. Now, let me ask you, when you started doing this, how much discovery was there when you started kind of going into these little rabbit holes and finding vehicles that I'm assuming you didn't know existed, and to say like, oh my God, that's a thing? Like, how did we not know about? Was there a lot of discovery as far as that goes?
Mike, I say that, printing the book and getting photography and all the other stuff was like really, really expensive, right? But the most expensive part of this whole project for both of us was discovering cars and then having to go out and find one and buy one because for a collection. So I think we're in the ballpark between the two of us. We bought 18 or 20 cars in this process. that we just didn't know existed before, or,
Yeah.
we knew like peripherally, but then got into it and said, wow, this is really cool. We really need to have one or two. A lot of times we duplicated these things. Sometimes it was a competition as to who was going to get one first. And they weren't all easy to find. Some are very limited production cars.
Right.
But the discovery was a big part of the process. But it was also what kept us going, right? Because we're both learners. We're both excited about learning new things. And the discovery was very difficult, but also very stimulating at the same time.
Yeah, it was a constant process of sort of frustration, followed by discovery, followed by fine tuning the information.
Right.
There's lots of tables and charts in the book that lay things out in a way that's really easy to see, but it didn't exist before, right? The Subaru WRX, the Impreza WRXs and WRX STIs. I went down the rabbit hole trying to figure out, the chassis codes and the various generations. And then of course, while we were doing that, we discovered that they weren't just generations, but within each generation, sometimes there were 2 or 3 facelifts. And so a lot of times when you thought you had, okay, I have this universe here in my hands now, I got the whole ball of wax, I understand it. And then all of a sudden you would realize, no, it's much more complicated than this. I gotta go back to the drawing board and figure this out. We'd see a picture of a car and it didn't fit into any of the criteria that we thought we understood. It's like, oh, there's 3 facelifts in this generation, not 2.
Right.
So there was a lot of that.
Okay.
Yeah, and some of those facelifts never made it to like our market or to a certain market.
Oh, sure.
That was, that was the thing. That's when you discover. Every once in a while, I would get like an email from Mark with a picture, and it would just say like, "Oh shit," and then we'd have to dig in.
Well, it's always amazing when you find something, some kind of random submodel, and I'm always intrigued when I see something that I've never seen before, and I'm like, "Oh, what the hell is that?" Because as enthusiasts, we say, okay, we know a decent amount about automobiles and automobile culture. And then I think the older we get, the more we realize how little we actually know until we start going into different genres of cars and different places in the world, whether it's JDM, European, it's kind of a never ending rabbit hole that you could just keep going down. And I don't know if there's really an end to it. At least I haven't found one yet.
Yeah, there's no end to it. And our book isn't intended to be the be all end all on any specific model or the hobby as a whole. We just wanted to get enough information out there and present it in a beautiful way so that if people could be enlightened and then kind of go down their own rabbit holes with things, right?
Right.
I mean, whole books have been written on 240Zs and Miatas and things like that. We don't have all the detail a lot of those going to have, but we did make a point of finding information that wasn't available anywhere else by digging these things. Like in the Miata, for example, Mark went down the rabbit hole of finding every special edition of Miata that was ever offered anywhere in the world. I mean, there's like in South Africa, there was like a 10 run of 10 cars called this certain thing. How many special editions were there, Mark?
Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So some of those rabbit holes, it wasn't just working on that exclusively, but some of those rabbit holes took months, so I'd be working on things, at the same time, but there's probably some tables in the book that I have, and Myron and I have over 100 hours in, and this occupies 1 page in the book.
Right.
So, it just, I sort of come from the science side, publishing scientific articles and whatnot. So, being complete and being precise is important. So if we're going to have a list of special editions, I want to make sure we have all of them. So sometimes we had to reach out to people in other countries and, they'd send us information. Google didn't work for this book, right? I mean,
Right.
The I touched on it a minute ago. The way that these books, these cars are talked about sometimes is by their chassis designation. Like, because like I said, Nissan Cherry doesn't mean anything. So like the Nissan Silvia came in lots of generations. And so people talk about the early cars as the CSP 311. So part of our mission,
the greatest Silvia of all time, by the way.
So part of our mission was to try and have that information available for every car in the book. Well, that turned out to be, quite a chore. Like, it's not written about, and some cars are not talked about in that way. So we'd have guys crawling around, we'd find someone that had one of these obscure cars, and we'd ask them to, crawl around and find the data plate and tell us what the chassis designation is. And so,
how were those conversations, right? When people found out what you were doing, and because I'm assuming you made a lot of great connections and I'm assuming a lot of great friends, while going through this process. I'm not sure if you did that much traveling, trying to do, research and stuff like that, but how did the conversations go? And were there any, or how many kind of, oh my God, moments were there when you were doing this type of research?
We got great support. I mean, again, one of the great things about the hobby in general, not just the Japanese part of it, but the automotive hobby now are the great people involved in it. And I'd say 99.9% of the enthusiasts that we contacted out of the blue to ask them, exactly what side of the engine is that turbocharger on, because we got conflicting things. We found the one guy in Australia that had one. They were really great. They went above and beyond almost every time we did. And you're right. We made some really, really great connections and some really great relationships as a result of that.
Yeah. Did you?
You find the guy, in Pakistan, who's got a car that nobody cares about, and you're excited about it. And the car's not worth a lot, but it's a cool car. It's a cool submodel. It's a special edition. You're his new best friend.
Of course, absolutely, of course. Well, so how was that, right? So, we have kind of a smaller view here in the U.S. about car culture abroad. What was the major differences that you found in doing research, not only on JDM cars, but some of the French cars or Italian cars or any of the other models that you had in the book? Did you find that there was a massive difference between U.S. car culture and everybody else? Or at the end, we're an enthusiast. This is what we love. Car doesn't make a difference. We just love being in this hobby.
Mark and I have both been involved with European cars for lots of years. And we've had a lot of friends pretty much internationally in the European car hobby. And I think I found that people who are into Japanese cars really to be no different. I mean, an enthusiast is an enthusiast. And if you're like at that top level of insanity, it doesn't matter what turns you on. Like you said about your stuff, really, I'm into what I have. I'm glad you're happy with what you have. And that's, I think we found them to be very open and welcoming and, again, wanting to go above and beyond. Nobody said, what are you, stupid, asking me that question? They really wanted to come out and help us in any way we could, because they saw, we explained our mission to them, that we wanted to elevate this level of the hobby in the eyes of Americans. We talk about, I've always said that, the Japanese with their cars were like the French with their wine. They kept all the good stuff for themselves. And this is just more of an educational process for our people, especially now that with the 25-year rule and the people are interested in bringing, cars over, and it's become really more of a commercial thing.
Right. So how is that? That's a great point, right? Because now, where are you guys based, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm in Houston.
And I'm in Akron, Ohio.
Okay, so I'm in the Bay Area in San Francisco. So out here, the beauty about living in California is I see more old stuff driving around in a week than I would when I used to live back in New York City, in Brooklyn, right? Just because cars go away, and they go away in October and they don't come out till March. Here, everything is driven year round. And so you might see some very obscure, Japanese K car, or you might see an R34, or you might see, little, Delica vans and stuff like that. We have a lot of that stuff out here. That 25-year rule really kind of opened the floodgates for JDM culture to come into the United States. And I think we're seeing it more and more and more. And out here, it's huge. It's huge. I mean, we have JDM shows that's all there is. And the cars are, again, it's kind of like it's always an adventure, because there's just so much I don't know about that side of the auto industry, because I've just never been exposed to it. So seeing them in person is one thing, but the fact that you guys have documented it and done it in such a fashion where people can take these books, they can look through them, they can educate themselves on what these vehicles are, and then more importantly, they go out and start to do their own research and possibly buy one. I think that's a great thing.
Well, there are a lot of great importers out there now. So you're right. You can find something, and all you got to do is make a phone call, and the stuff can be here like in a month and a half. Time you buy. It's a great thing about Japanese auctions.
When you're starting in anything like this, and cars, even cheap cars are expensive, right? I mean, we're not talking about collecting stamps that are $3 a piece. Even inexpensive cars, you're talking about thousands of dollars. So when people are spending that kind of money, they want to have some sort of idea, what they're buying. And I remember many years ago, before we started the book, being at an auction, and there was a Nissan Skyline there. And I knew a little bit, but I really didn't know a lot. And people were crowding around the car. That's a Skyline, that's a Skyline. And they had heard the word, but nobody knew how many Skylines there were, right? So there's 13 generations of Skyline, if you count the 2 generations from Prince before Nissan acquired them. And so if you don't have an understanding, an early Skyline is the same thing as an R34 in your brain if you don't know that there's a whole family of Skylines. And so I think that's one of the things that the book does, is it puts it into perspective. You can spend 20 minutes in the Skyline section. You don't even have to read the whole thing, but just look at the tables, look at the photos, and you understand, okay, this has gone on from the late 60s, up until, very recently. This is a whole family of cars. Let me kind of understand and figure out, okay, which part of that family, lights my fire. Right.
Absolutely. Well, so here, I mean, we know the basics of, Japanese manufacturers, right? We've got the Datsun, who was the Nissan, and Mazda, and so on. How many manufacturers did you actually cover?
14.
Was it 14?
14. Yeah.
Yeah. Because we got into the Daihatsus and the Mitsuokas, and the Hinos. Yeah.
Okay. Because that's the other part. There have been a lot of manufacturers that have started here, or not, I shouldn't say started, but like Daihatsu is a perfect example. Like they were here for a little while and then they got ousted. Suzuki was here, made a couple of cars, they left. So how difficult do you think it is for Japanese manufacturers to actually come over here, gain a foothold, and really make it?
Well, a lot has to do with their product line. You take situations like Daihatsu and Hino, they were actually acquired by Toyota. Okay. So Toyota made a conscious decision. We're not going to have, they still make cars. They still sell cars. Hino doesn't. Hino's a truck line now. But Daihatsu still sells cars in Europe. They're small economy cars that basically wouldn't sell here, like 1 liter and under cars for small markets. So the market is basically controlled by the large manufacturers at this point. I'm still rooting for Mitsuoka to come in and make a charge for the United States, but they're still what, building 1,000 cars a year or something like that. So I think we see what we're going to see right now. It's kind of a challenging market for anything. I mean, Mazda doesn't consistently make a profit in the United States,
right?
Even though their product is spectacular.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What do you guys have in doing all the research and putting stuff together? Did you each come away with a favorite, or are there too many to actually choose a favorite? I'm going to ask if you have a favorite JDM car, and then what your favorite is, and then your favorite all time, and then if you have one in your collections that you just always gravitate to, that you always walk to, and that you always get in.
Mark, you go first.
Oh, thanks a lot. Yeah, I've got several cars in my collection that I guess would qualify as favorites because I spent my hard-earned money on them, so I must like them. I don't know that I can come up with one. I've got a Series 2 Mazda Cosmo Sport, which is just an unbelievably super cool car. Really interesting engineering with a twin rotor, rotary engine. I've got a twin cam 240Z that's called a Z432, 4 valves per cylinder, 3 carburetors, 2 camshafts. So that's a pretty special car. Nissan Pulsar GTIR, kind of looks like a grocery getter. It's a hot hatch, but ridiculous performance. You get in it, you don't know what to expect, and when you step on the gas, it's like you're in the Millennium Falcon. I mean, it's just
is that an 80s? Is that from the 80s?
90.
Okay.
90, right, Myron?
Yeah, early 90s.
Yeah, early 90s.
Okay.
I've got a Subaru 22B, which is kind of a blue chip legendary kind of car.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And until I drove that, I thought my Pulsar GTIR was fast. The Subaru is really ridiculous. Special body, wide fenders, 2 doors. Trying to think. I mean, I love all the Japanese stuff I have. Oh, the other one that not a lot of people know about, but everybody who's come to my garage and driven it has loved it. An Isuzu Belay GTR. They made about 1,400 of them. It was a homologated race car. It's got a twin cam motor. It's basically like a Japanese version of an Alpha GTA.
Okay.
Yeah,
I see that
at 1/10 of the price.
That's good. We like 1/10 of the price.
Yeah. So I think what this has done to both of our collections, when Mark and I both started and we started buying the cars we were most interested in, we started making our lists. We were focusing on the cars of the generation that we always liked, 50s, 60s, 70s, not that much in the 50s. So, I had a Cosmo Sport. I still have a Cosmo Sport. I had a Belay GTR, which I just sold. So we were looking at 60s and 70s cars. But as Mark just kind of alluded to, a lot of the cars that it kind of brought us into a newer generation of 80s and 90s cars and appreciation for that.
Yeah.
Like the cars he said, I'd say definitely the car that I use most, I knew nothing about until we started writing the book, is my Autex Zagato. They made about 90 cars. It's a Nissan Leopard chassis with a handmade Zagato body and a turbo engine. Super, super amazing. That was $160,000 new in 1989. I mean, insane. I just picked up a Toyota Century, a V12 Toyota Century, which is just flat amazing. So, it really kind of brought us into a whole new generation of collecting cars and appreciation for those cars.
Right. Oh, that's fantastic. Do you guys have, so like, Myron, you have your 356, you've owned a bunch of those. Do you now gravitate towards JDM stuff, or do you still gravitate towards, classic European or new European or whatever the case is?
Yeah. I'm going to speak for both Mark and myself. I think we're pretty much automotive omnivores still. I mean, we're passionate about the Japanese cars. the Japanese thing. We weren't passionate about them before because we were ignorant about them. Now we're just as passionate about that segment of the hobby. But for example, Mark and I both showed cars at the Amelia Island Concord this past weekend. Mark showed a very special, very rare Denzel, an Austrian sports car from the early 50s. And I showed a California custom car called the Polynesian Hot Rod cover car that was done by Valley Custom Shop in 1953. So no, we don't have a laser focus. Yeah, exactly.
Very, very cool. And I'm assuming, I mean, the cars are obscure. I'm assuming both of you gentlemen do a bunch of your own work on these things.
You know what? I think that the opposite is totally true for me, and I won't speak for Mark, but I wish
it's totally true for me as well.
I wish I had the skill, right? But you can't. You can't build a car out of a piece of clay. And the raw material is just not there in my hands. I'm fortunate to have, and Mark is too. We have really, really good friends who are skilled and talented in ways that we aren't. We express our passion in a different way, like writing the book and things like that.
Right.
It turns out that a lot of that is determined when you're young. So I was always interested in cars, and my friends were always interested in cars. None of my friends' parents worked on cars. I didn't know anybody growing up that worked on cars. It wasn't like a too good to work on cars thing. It was just we didn't know anybody. My dad didn't go in the garage and work on cars.
Sure.
Yeah, and that was the same with me. My mom never drove. My dad hated cars. He thought it was the worst of the necessary evils out there. In fact, his last bit of advice on his deathbed to me was, never buy a car you can't pay cash for. I see you're going to be crazy about this stuff.
So
but I think a lot of it is like that. I mean, my father was a physician, and it was the same exact thing. He always had, wonderful cars, but he wasn't he wasn't working on them. We never wrenched on stuff. My taste went directly back to, he was into European stuff. My tastes are all hot rod Americans, big block muscle cars, things like that. Right. But I think it's almost a little bit better that way, because everything is a new discovery when you start learning about the cars, and when you didn't grow up about them. It's a constant evolving process, which is, I think, it's great.
Right.
Absolutely.
I would love to work on cars. It just, the time passed me. I actually would be good at it. I mean, I'm a surgeon that fixes bones. All I do all day is the same thing that the guy who restores my cars does. I use screwdrivers and wrenches and power tools. I have no experience working on cars.
Orthopedists, like I said, I used to race motorcycles. You all have put me back together probably 6 or 7 different times.
Right.
So this shell has a lot of work in there because of you guys. So I thank you for that.
Right.
Keep
So
doing what you're doing.
So it would be hard. It would be hard to imagine that you could break your bone bad enough that I couldn't put it back together. But if you asked me to tune your carburetor, I just have no experience.
Right. Yeah. No, I get it. I totally get it. Well, guys, let me ask you, where can everybody find A Quiet Greatness? Where can they get it? Where can they get information? If you have social media contacts, or if you have social media pages, where should everybody go?
Well, we self-published because we didn't want to give up control of the book. We wanted it to look like we wanted it to look like. We took it to the major high-end publishers. They said, yeah, it's fantastic, it's amazing, but it's about Japanese cars. We don't think it'll sell. So at that point, we decided that we were going to do it on its own. So, and we wanted to keep it accessible to people, right? So we priced it as appropriately as possible as we possibly could. So best place is at our website, aquietgreatness.com or quietgreatness.com. That's the primary location where it's available. We do have it in 2 of the best automotive bookstores in the country, Autobooks, Airabooks in Burbank, and Past Diners outside of Detroit in Birmingham, Michigan. So if you're in those 2 areas near LA or Detroit, they're available in those 2 stores. Otherwise, it's just online. And we do have Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, A Quiet Greatness.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Well, I'll tell you, you're in Ohio, you're in Houston. I happen to have family in both in Ohio and in Houston. So don't be surprised if you get an email from, from this guy saying, "Hey, I would really love to come and check out your collections."
That would be fantastic. I would love to show you my collection.
Yeah,
Oh my God.
likewise. And we have American muscle in there too, just to kind of draw you in.
Well,
for a
hey,
little
it
bit.
goes both ways. If you guys come out to the West Coast and to the Bay Area, I have a warehouse full of old American stuff that you guys are more than welcome to jump behind the wheel of and play with.
Well, you got a big charger project you're working on, right? Don't you have a
Oh,
charger?
I've got two. I've got a 68 charger that I've had for 20 years that we just did a full revamp mechanical on it, because that used to be my road race car, was a 68 charger, believe it or not. And then I've got a 69 Daytona that we're doing a 800 plus horsepower red eye swap in, and that car is slated to go to the Nürburgring and do something that's never been done before. So we'll see what happens with that. So yeah, project after project, as we all know, it's a big, expensive rabbit hole. But it's fun. It's just, it's straight up fun. So, but gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for making the books and putting this collection together, because I think it's going to open the eyes of so many people that don't know that much about the JDM stuff. And it's going to force them to go down rabbit holes of their own, volition, whether it's French cars or American cars or Italian cars or JDM cars. And I think we need so much more of this in the hobby. So 6 years, long time, but it's cool, man. It really is cool.
Well, we appreciate your having us on.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. And are you guys working on anything else after 6 years? Or you're like, okay, now we're going to do French cars? Like what? Anything else that you got to
Mark, go ahead.
Yeah. So I've already finished another book, and that'll be it's already available. It'll land in the States in a month. It's on this really interesting Austrian car, the Denzel.
Okay.
If anyone's interested in that, the website is amazing, Denzel, DENZEL.com. And maybe in the coming months, we'll talk about that.
Absolutely. Listen, anytime you guys want to come back on and BS about cars, all in. Send me an email. Let's do it. I don't care if it has to do with just car news or what you guys are building. I just like to BS about cars. Awesome. So,
well, I'm gonna keep writing books. I enjoy the process. I think I've gone to the well my one time with Myron. I'm pretty sure the answer is no.
Never say never, but it's I think
never.
Mark's got good intuition.
Well, guys, thank you again for coming on. And like I said, keep me posted about anything else you guys are doing. We'll have you back on and we'll talk about everything at a later date. But I appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening, folks. And again, please subscribe to the Hot Rod BBQ podcast. If you're on Spotify, check us out there. Subscribe to it on iTunes. And if you are going to go to YouTube, make sure you go to the Hot Rod BBQ podcast and hit that subscribe button, and we'll come to you every week.